We're pleased to have Ken Wilson here this month to give us a talk on walkers, trekkers, and travelers. And Ken this is a topic that he's collected for a long time. I can remember years ago being at shows and he would talk about or tell me, there's always some downtime for a postcard dealer. It's not all selling, it's a lot of visiting and going back and forth. But hearing him talk about Walker postcards, I didn't know what they were at the time, but he certainly made us aware. And this is going to be a real treat to hear what he has to say today. I'm amazed. I've had an opportunity to hear part of his talk already, but amazed at how men and women, husbands and wives and their children, and they sometimes even took along a pet. If you can imagine, I mean, just taking a pet to the grocery store would be an adventure, but imagine taking them on a track across country and trying to sell postcards and feed them and water them. And it, this was really something, really wonderful that they're on postcards. And Ken, please, welcome to you. And we look forward to hearing your presentation now. Thank you.
So as it says there, I'm going to talk about walkers, trekkers, and travelers. For a long time in the postcard collecting world, those have generally been referred to as walkers. If you go up to a dealer and you're looking for this sort of thing, you ask them for walkers. Although walkers is sort of a misnomer because we're talking about people who made long distance treks across country by horseback or walking or dog cart or bicycle even, but not motorized transportation. During the first decades of the 20th century, this seemed to be a thing, and people were getting out and walking to promote a product, to advertise a cause, or simply because they felt the need to get out and do this. And it was fortunate that the interest in this activity happened at the same time as the golden age of postcards. So many of these walkers could supplement their earnings by selling postcards along the way. They advertised themselves, they sold postcards for a profit, and the two just went hand in hand. Okay, what you're seeing now is some thumbnails of some of the things that we will talk about, and we're going to start with this is Edward Peyton Weston, and he may be our most famous walker. There are a lot of postcards of him walking long distances, but he started much earlier than the age of postcards. He was born into a family in Rhode Island. His father was a publisher and a writer, an adventurer. His mother had published a novel in 1859. And so he grew up sort of in a, interesting household. He left home early. He joined the circus. He traveled with circuses. He traveled with musicians. And he just learned to like being out and traveling. And in 1859, he made a wager that Abraham Lincoln would not win the White House. Well, of course, he lost that wager. So to pay the debt, he had to walk from Massachusetts to Washington, D.C. for the Lincoln inauguration. It took him 10 days in bad weather. He arrived at Lincoln's inauguration late, but he was able to meet President Lincoln. And meeting Lincoln and the publicity he gained from this started him on a lifelong adventure of walking for publicity and fame and money. In this, again, in the days before postcards, in the 1870s and 80s, walking, speed walking, we would call it today, was a huge spectator sport. People would walk indoors, outdoors, all sorts of events. It was very big in England, and then it came to the United States. Uh, and Weston won a number of these contests. It turned out to be very good at this. Let's see. I wanted to mention that Patricia Holloway of our Austin Club sent me an email yesterday to tell me that a character that she had presented a presentation on that built clocks. This man built a huge clock that traveled all over the world in the 1870s. He also was the manager for a female professional walker. Her name was Mary Marshall was her name. So it wasn't just an activity for men, although it generally was so. At one point, Edward Weston was known as the most famous athlete in the world. That seems very odd in today's world of professional sports and so forth, but such was the news in, before the world of postcards and TV and telephone. All right, here is Edward again, one of his later trips. He's now he's 69 years old on that trip. He continued to do this well into his 70s, and he promoted it. He would walk into a new town, he would spiff up, dust off his hat, spiff up his appearance, because he knew hundreds of people would turn out to see him, and he'd be able to sell them postcards and bask in their, acclaim. He also found that he was very popular with the ladies, so he tried to look very sharp as he reached each of these places. Okay, we're going to move on to some other walkers. This is Paul Pressler. He was from Saxony, and he left Saxony in 1904. He was going to travel 125,000 miles by 1916. He did travel for almost the whole year of 1905. Oh, I'm sorry. No, he traveled for years going through all of those countries, but his trip was not completed. But World War II began in 1914, and he had to cancel the rest of his trip and remain in the United States. But he covered all of those. You can see in the card all the names of the places he went in: South Africa and Argentina and Chile and Peru and Bolivia and so forth. Here is another postcard of him with some of his destinations. Not as attractive a postcard, but it's full of information. Down at the bottom, it says UWTA. I can't find anything about that on the internet, but I think it must have meant Union or something of World Travelers Association. And apparently he's number 9. So this was maybe a big thing at the time. 2 more postcards. This is a bride and groom on the left. And they left Colorado Springs to walk to New York City. They were going to do that in 90 days. This was in 1912. Many of these Walker postcards, sometimes their history exists only on a single postcard. There is no history of, did they complete the trip? What was the rest of their life like? Some of them that information exists, but many of them it does not. And then on the right are 2 couples from Holland, 2 Dutch couples that are going to walk 40,000 kilometers for a wager. And I noticed something just recently. I've shown these 2 postcards several times, but look at the 2 postcards. All 3 men have a cane in their hand, a walking stick. None of the women do. And it occurred to me, I haven't looked this up, but it occurred to me that the fashion of the time, a man could have a cane, he could sport a cane. It was a thing for walking or just being a dude or whatever. But if a woman had a cane at that time, it only signified an infirmity. So, once again, we have a difference in the sexes there. What? He gets a walking stick and I don't? That's what she said. So anyway, all sorts of information in these postcards. This is a fellow who was from Nome, Alaska. He was a mail carrier, and he delivered mail by dog sled, huskies. and he decided he was going to travel from Alaska to Washington, D.C. So he started out on ice and snow with his dog sled. And when he'd reach places where there was no longer ice or snow, he'd put wheels on the sled and continue on. And he did make it to Washington, D.C. He got to meet President Roosevelt and his two sons. Yeah, so and everywhere he went, same thing, selling postcards. And sometimes I like messages on postcards. Sometimes you will see these little message on the back. This is the man we saw in, so forth and so on. So I like those little living history. Okay, this is a striking postcard. Most of the postcard dealers have seen this one because there seem to be a number of copies of it. This is Mr. Fred Villancourt, and he was a railroad brakeman for the Grand Trunk Railroad. He lost both legs in a railroad accident. Well, he was out of the brakeman job, and his choice was to get this dog cart, and he traveled around the country selling postcards of himself, of the notoriety of this legless man traveling. And apparently he sold a lot of them because, as I said, a lot of dealers have seen this card. But it's a very striking image. Once you see it, you won't forget it. Okay, this is a beautiful, beautiful black and white photograph. And I know nothing about it except what you see right in front of you. It's a man and presumably wife. They're traveling with their gospel wagon. Assume they're preaching along the way. They appear to be in Clinton, Georgia, outside the office of the Clinton Democrat. And they say they're going from New York to Atlanta to San Francisco. No telling if they made it or not. I don't find any more about them, but gorgeous photograph and a gorgeous big dapple gray horse. More couples. Two on the left are the Kelsey kids, and they are circumambulating the world or the earth. They started from New York. They were going to go all the way around the world, 48,000 miles. Again, we don't know how far they got. We don't know what happened to them. It looks like they're both very prepared. If I'm right, they're both carrying pistols, so they're ready. On the right, we have a couple with 3 children who accepted a wager to walk from Vienna to Paris for 20,000 francs or pounds, francs, I assume. But imagine that. Imagine trying to walk that distance with a buggy and 3 children, one of them an infant in arms. Let's see. Now this is a little bit larger story. In 1918, there was no cure for tuberculosis, even though it was killing 1 in 7 people, and it was known as consumption. In 1890, Robert Koch said that he had invented a cure for tuberculosis. He called it tuberculin, and he proceeded to treat people with it, and it turned out they were getting sick and dying. And after much other testing, it turned out tuberculin was not a cure for tuberculosis. Efforts to manage consumption or tuberculosis included other products that came up. And this one, we're looking at a tramp, 1918 tramp to promote tuberculicide. Tuberculicide, another purported cure for tuberculosis that did not work. But these people left Los Angeles and they went all the way across the United States to Washington, D.C. to ask President Wilson to provide more funds for tuberculosis research. Now, the tuberculin that Koch had invented or come up with was used as a tuberculous skin test later on, but we weren't able to conquer tuberculosis until the 40s and 50s. This is the card that I owned first that got me started on this group of people. And here they are somewhere in the middle of this trek. And you can see it's at least two families with children and their tents and all their gear. And, it must have been quite an adventure and quite an undertaking. They did make it to the White House. I don't know if they met President Wilson, but they were able to present their proposal to him to provide more money for tuberculosis research. Now, if you're interested in this story, when I was researching this, I found that Eleanor Ellie McCracken had written this whole story of the tuberculin thing and this tramp up for Postcard History magazine in 2019. And you can find that in their archives. And it's a very interesting story with much more detail than I could give it today. But I highly recommend that. We're very lucky to have Bill Burton and Postcard History magazine. This is another fellow we don't know a lot about. There's a number of different postcards of him. His name is Captain V. Edwards, and he went from San Diego, California to New York. It seems that California to New York was very often the selected journey for these trips. Maybe it's nice and warm in California and they think, oh yeah, I can walk to New York. Both of these had messages on them, which I like. And it says, he came all the way from California in that rig. The other one says, this is how he looks nearby. Okay, two fellows from my home state, Texas. These two brothers, the Linebarger brothers, they're from Fort Worth, Texas. They called themselves physical culturists, and they walked to San Francisco, or again, we don't know for sure if they made it. There's not much online about them, but another little pup along with them, and they wanted to promote. They apparently did sell postcards along the way or give them away, but their deal was to promote walking as a physical fitness thing. I like their suspenders. I would wear those if I had them. Fort Worth, Linebarger brothers. If you look up that Linebarger brothers, you run across attorneys and all sorts of people, but not walkers. I'm going to cheat on this because I told you no motorized vehicles. But this woman just, stole my heart. She has got her Harley Davidson motorcycle. This is 1914. And she is a manicurist in Waco, Texas. She decided she's going to ride this motorcycle around the world. Her name was Della Cruz. So she took off, and let's see, I think I have another image of her. Nope. Maybe, there it is. Della Cruz. There she is with her sidecar and the pup. I think this pup gets around. I think it's the same one in all of those. And she took off, and of course, again, World War I happened, and she did not complete her journey, although she went to Jamaica and Puerto Rico, and she ended up back in Los Angeles, where she went back to work as a manicurist, and she disappears from the voter rolls in about 1926. So no telling what happened to her, but it's I love both of these postcards, but that one in particular is striking. A couple nearer my own age, these people, the Barings, they lost their home in Florida. I think it's Berang, B-E-R-R-A-N-G, Berang. They lost their home in Florida, and they decided to hook up these oxen to a wagon and travel. And they would travel across the country, and every evening they'd stop, they'd camp out, they'd build a little campfire like she is sitting behind, and they'd cook their coffee, but they also would get out their shortwave radio, and they would listen to the stock market quotes and the baseball scores. So they look quite happy, and I hope they're enjoying their life. Okay, this is a completely different sort of story. Even though it starts the same, it's a couple who said they lost a baby and a home in a fire. They took off and traveled, and you can see all the pennants from places they went, Chicago and Rochester, New York, and Utica, New York, and so forth and so forth. And they sold these postcards and solicited donations to keep going. And they did this for apparently some years. And it turns out it was all a hoax. It was a scam. They did not lose a house and a baby in a fire. But there again, out on the road there, you get all kinds. Here's another dog cart. This fellow started from St. John, Newfoundland, and he was going to travel 20,000 miles in 4 years. Beautiful dog cart. As you see, they get a lot of attention when they come into town. All right, this is another famous walker. This also got me started in the walking thing. Another Texan. He was from Abilene, Texas. His name was Pliny Wingo, Plennie, Wingo, Wingo. He lost his diner in Abilene in the Depression, and he was at odds what to do and so forth. And at that time, stunts seemed to be very popular. There was Dolores mentioned a while ago, the boy who was sitting in a tree for some kind of record, a tree setter. There were also people who there was more than one who pushed a peanut up Pikes Peak with their nose. People were doing pole sitting and all sorts of things. So anyway, he decided nobody had walked around the world backwards, so he thought he could do that. So he has these fancy sunglasses with mirrors on them, and he took off and he walked from Fort Worth to New York City. He caught a ship. When he got to Europe, he walked all the way to Istanbul, Turkey. And when he got to Turkey, somebody paid his fare to come home to California. When he got to California, he got right back out on the road and he walked backwards from San Diego to Wichita. Now, he's very well known. It's hard. This postcard is very hard to find the real photo. But there's lots of pictures of him in newspapers, like the one on the right. And he reprised this thing for publicity many times. And he would go and talk and walk and so forth. It became quite well known, quite famous. But he wasn't the only person who walked backwards. Patrick Harmon, who is the tall one on the right, he walked backwards. He left San Francisco in 1915. He walked all the way to New York City. And he didn't have the sunglasses with the rearview mirror, so he had a fellow with him, the fellow on the left, who was his watcher. This fellow would walk ahead of him, alert him to any obstacles in the road, and keep him on track. And he paid the walker $4 a day. Another Texan. I know I've got all those of you from other states are groaning now. Another Texan, but John Rose, another legless man with a goat cart. He lost both of his legs in a streetcar accident as a child. And I would see lots of postcards. There are linen postcards. There are excellent real photos and not so good images of John Rose. He was also sometimes known on postcards as Sandy Jack. But at first glance, you think, okay, another person who's making a living, going around exhibiting his calamity and what happened to him and selling postcards. But it turns out that John Rose was a very successful farmer in his adult life. He ended up owning 4 farms in Texas, and he would work with employees on the farms through the growing season. But in the winter, he would load up onto his cart and he'd take off and he'd visit Texas towns selling postcards to supplement their income. There's a beautiful, beautiful picture of him in Texas. Oh, I always have to look at my notes to tell you where that is. Kerrville, in Kerrville, Texas. But it's a great, great photo, nice and sharp and clear and lots of detail. And here are some of the other postcards that you see, a situation that all of the postcard people are acquainted with, where you have a real photo postcard, but later it was reprinted as a printed postcard from the same image. So there's other postcards of Mr. Rose, lots of them. But an interesting character. I would have liked to have met him. I'd like to have seen his farms. This fellow just labeled this card as he walks so fast he leaves his own shadow, and he named himself the Walking King of the World. Now, it's some sort of gathering. There are people who have come on the other side of the fence to watch him walk, but there's not much else about him online. But he's got those Joe Namath white shoes on, and he's moving. Okay, another popular photo postcard. You see various versions of this postcard, and there's a lot of backstory to it. Harry Bensley from England was sort of a rake and ne'er-do-well, sometimes scam artist and so forth. He heard J. Pierpont Morgan and some others in one of the clubs in London talking about, would it be possible for a person to walk around the world without letting anyone know his identity? And he just piped up and said, sure, I can do that. Well, the wager got worse. It was like he had to maintain being unknown, but he also had to get married during the trip. So he accepted this and he started out. Now, then the story falls apart. There's all sorts of stories about he was here and he was there and he was in Europe and so forth. Other stories say he didn't ever make it out of the British Isles. And apparently at some point, Morgan let him out of the bet and gave him $4,000 and said, no, it's okay. You know, we're done. And apparently Mr. Beasley ended up joining the military for World War I. And I can't tell you if he survived the war or not, but you see a lot of these, and I had seen this card for years and thought, okay, it's a novelty sort of thing. And you can't imagine anybody have done this long trip wearing that helmet, for one thing. But the true story is nothing is quite as it seems. Another Texan, sorry. This is Ralph Sanders from Brownsville. That's my hometown. That's where I was born. And his bull, Jerry. And they're going from the lower Rio Grande Valley to New York City. There's quite a few postcards of the two of them. I like this one particularly because if you haven't already noticed, Jerry, the bull, has taken this moment to relieve himself on the sidewalk. And you're all muted, but I hope you're laughing. So to me, this is interesting because the photographer and Mr. Sanders decided, okay, we got this shot and this shot and this shot. Let's use the one with Jerry peeing on the sidewalk because it's funny. He went with it. He went with the joke. Two brothers, they left Oklahoma. They were born to a father who was determined to make stalwart, independent men out of them. Their mother died when they were very, very young. And he set them out on various adventures. They rode, the two brothers, Bud and Temple, and they rode from Oklahoma to New Mexico by themselves on a long trek. And when they got back, they rode from Oklahoma to New York City. They were on their own. Nobody else was with them, although it wasn't quite as difficult as you might imagine because they may have camped some, but also Dad was well-to-do and he arranged for hotels for them along the way. But quite adventurous boys. They they both grew up. Temple, let's see, one of them, Bud, I think, was in the oil business. Temple became an attorney, and he died here in Austin just like in the 1960s or so. But their stories are great. When they were in New York, they got to meet President Taft at the White House, and they liked that very much. But their goal was to meet Roosevelt in New York. And they said Taft was sort of not fun, but Roosevelt would get down on the floor and play with them. And he was a big hero of theirs and their father's. Their adventure never stopped. At one point, they bought the motorcycle you see on the right, and they rode that back home. Another one of these long trips, they bought an automobile and drove that back home. Quite an interesting pair of young men. And when they got home after one of these trips in Oklahoma, they had a big to-do for them, very formal. And Bud, the short one, would not, he wouldn't kiss any ladies. You know, he said, no, wasn't doing that. Okay, this is a book that was published by Temple's widow called Bud and Me. That's readily available on Amazon, and great stories, amazing journeys for these two boys. Okay, moving back to professional walkers. This is Mr. and Mrs. Wolf and their whole entourage. And they made almost a lifetime out of doing these walks to promote physical fitness. And they sold hundreds and hundreds of postcards along the way. And the police would meet them at the city and usher them in. It was big news. They were just seen everywhere. And she wrote about physical fitness, and this was their campaign. I like this particular postcard. It's not, as you can see, in good condition, but I like history and I like things that have been used and mailed. And so this is a perfect postcard for me because Mrs. Walker wrote this herself. And she says, if you would like to like to be our selling agent, we would make you a good offer. So she was selling these postcards wholesale to postcard dealers to sell. So it became quite a business for the Walking Wolves. And just to show that this sort of thing went on for a long time, it still goes on. I think some of you have probably seen somebody out walking the highways today. I remember a man walking with a large Christian cross on his back, taking it across the country. Things like that still happen. This is in 1957, this car, Dick Cook. And it looks like that's a scooter he rides, but it's not. It's a wagon that he pulls. It's just a gorgeous postcard, and he's walking through the 48 states. But I like the postcard with the barbecue restaurant in the back and all. It's a really neat postcard. Okay, another Texan grown. This fellow's name is Snake King, W.A. Snake King. Grew up in the circus, he understood circus things, and he realized that circuses needed animals and snakes and sideshow things. So he set himself up in Brownsville and raised and sold animals for those kind of circuses and sideshows. And he gave himself the name Snake King. He decided in 1914 to ride from Brownsville to Austin to invite the governor of Texas to the Midwinter Fair. Well, I remember getting this postcard at one of Jim Taylor's shows, and I was just thrilled to get it. Again, it's got cancellation ink on the front. It's not perfect, but what a story. And what a dude with his fancy jacket and everything. I liked it so much that in Austin, we took that postcard and made up this little printed postcard to advertise our Austin postcard show in 2004, and added in Austin and added a stamp for interest. I recently have been introduced by email to Lyle Henry Jr., and he contacted me about trekking postcards, and he also has a big collection of postcards and just published this book, University of Iowa Press, called Trekking Across America. And I have the book, it's great. He's got some trekkers in it that I don't have, some I haven't seen, but it's a great book. If you're interested in this subject, I highly recommend it. And just as a side note, Lyle and I are both considering what to do with our collections of Walker postcards. Perhaps combining the two wouldn't be the thing. Maybe these two collections of Walker postcards might end up in two different institutions. So I'm not sure, but if anybody has any suggestions about that, contact me, contact Lyle. You can find all of his information on Amazon about his book. These are two of my favorite walkers, probably a brother and sister, and they've decided to be wayfarers. Well, the whole family's involved. You can see Dad's shadow down in the lower right, snapping the picture, and I'll bet you that's Mom's shadow on the left. and they all decked out. And either they're doing this for the fun of it, or they're going to walk to town, or they're walking to the train station to hop on the train and go see Aunt Ella. Although the young girl is not wearing shoes, but very common for that time. But I love that photo. Again, it's not a great photo, but it's a really cool story, and there's always a little bit of mystery in any of these. Okay, that's it. I wish you all happy travels, and walking is good for you. Get out, walk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken. Wow, what a group of cars. Just really, really amazing. And all of those kids and pets and animals to feed. And it's just amazing. Truly, truly.
First up is Clarissa Vargas with some cards that she's put, excuse me, put up. And Clarissa, why don't you take it away right now?
Share this.
Got it?
Yes. Hi.
Good.
Hi, Clarissa.
I have one postcards, and if you want, I can share it.
Always interested in looking at another walker, but that makes me feel better. I thought you were going to tell me all the ones that I made mistakes on.
No. How about you keep me so I can find them so I can share it, and I'll come back to me.
Whether or not you have any cards of religious pilgrimages.
Not so much. And I was really looking for real photos. It seemed like some of the religious pilgrimages are printed cards and European cards and so forth. And I pretty much stuck to real photos. And I don't recall running across any like from the States that were real photos.
Do you think they exist though?
Oh, they must. Although I hadn't really thought too much about it. It'll give me something to look for.
Okay, 2 or 3 other people patted you on the back, but Dallas McVerney comes in with something that I was going to ask if nobody else did. Is Ezra Meeker and his ox-drawn wagon considered a walker?
Well, I suppose so. His trek is so well represented in postcards and history that I didn't consider it. I was going for a little bit more unusual stories. But yeah, I would say sure, why not? I mean, he made these long travels across the United States.
Didn't Meeker follow the Oregon Trail and set up a
Yes.
whole
Yes.
network of people to support preserving it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a wonderful set of postcards.
Are they sets or are they just one of a kind, but cards that he did on the spot, or did he actually pre-print them?
I'm not real big on sets and so forth. I said that, but let's say a wonderful group of postcards, because there's many postcards from all the different stops along that trip. Whether they were produced in sequence, I don't know.
I think I've seen
they're a
lot.
numbered set, and they are printed. So I've got about 20 of them. They're all for sale, and so far eBay hasn't had anybody bite on them. But
who was this that just spoke? Was that you, Dennis?
yes.
Oh, okay.
I think they're quite common cards. I found that when I was setting up and dealing, that I didn't have much luck selling them, because it seems like the people that want those have them.
Okay.
Okay.
Clarissa, have you found the card you wanted to show us?
Yeah, I can share.
Sure.
Yeah, while Clarissa's getting that ready, Ken,
I'm ready.
I think I have a set for you.
Okay. Oh, that's Eli Smith. Yeah, that's him from Nome, Alaska. That's a great card. I like it.
I think you show him on when he had wheels on his cards. I was always wondering how he did go all the way to Washington.
Right. Yeah. That's I don't have an image of him like this without the wheels. I have that one with the wheels. So
I don't know why I got this one, but somehow it was in my collection.
Well,
In the back it says we'll leave Washington on January 5th, 2000.
Oh, he's got snow for his return trip. That's great.
Yeah.
If you want to sell it, I'll buy it. If not, if you loan me a copy of it, I'll put it in with this talk.
I'll definitely, you can have a copy for sure.
Okay,
And
great.
then, the other one I didn't put is that they're still doing it. This is on a bicycle,
Oh, yeah.
and and the back it has even a poem.
That's good. Well, I found I've got maybe 150 cards in this group, and sometimes it's hard to like not include every one of them. I like these sort of stories.
Okay, there's nobody else has put anything up, so let's open it up, Hal.
Very good. We'll unmute anybody who has something. Please unmute yourself, and we'll just hear what you have to say.
They're all asleep. I put them all to sleep.
No, not at all. This was fascinating.
Yeah.
I had no idea. I mean, it's really what postcards are about, right? You can find all kind of topics you never heard of it.
Really?
Roseanne is
has her
holding up
hand
her
up.
hand.
Yeah, hi. Well, now, and I don't know what happens in the middle of the country, but two comments on that. My thought as I was watching this is that people going from Kansas or Texas to Washington or New York are really traveling pretty easy because there aren't many big mountains there. And the number two is that on the West Coast, we have the Pacific Crest Trail. And on the East Coast is the Appalachian Trail. So, and I know many people who have done the Pacific Coast Trail multiple times. And that goes from here in San Diego all the way up to Seattle. And I believe that the Appalachian, and correct me if I'm wrong, goes from somewhere in the south up to Maine.
Georgia.
And who was the governor of South Carolina who claimed he was always walking the Appalachian Trail, but he was really in South America with his mistress?
Oh, certainly wasn't me.
So,
This brings up a point that I should have made earlier. If you remember the second fellow that walked backwards with
Yeah.
his helper. In reading about them, it brings up a point that relates exactly to what you're talking about. Cross country from California to New York, you've got some good stretches, but you've got some terribly hard country in the middle there. And
right.
apparently a lot of these people that trekked across that way, when nobody's around, they would catch the train and cover some distance, but they'd get off before the next town of any significant size so they could walk into that town. And that was apparently, it's suspected to be very true for that one backwards walker in 1915. So, and I imagine that happened in other cases. And so many of those walkers that, you know, we saw their picture at the startup, but never heard from them again. Some of them probably, Jerry was the bull, Sanders. He actually made a wager with another friend of his, a cowboy in Texas, and they were going to race, and he was going to ride the bull, and the cowboy was going to ride a horse, and who got to Washington, D.C. first. And the other guy on the horse didn't even make it to the state line. So, you know, it's like, yeah, there was, you know, those were some rugged trips.
What's the average pricing for these cards?
It depends on how exciting they are. You know, Plenty Wingo, I've never seen another one for sale. And somebody in his family wrote to me a long time ago and wanted that card. And I gave them copies of it, but I kept the card on, you know how postcard people are. We're greedy little devils. And, you know, $20 to $100, somewhere in there.
Okay.
Ken, we're not greedy. We are emotionally attached.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes,
thank
that.
you, Roxanne.
We are acquisitors.
For
So
territorial.
it's easy now that we can digitize our collections, but
Yeah.
it was probably much harder earlier.
Well, I believe, and I know that a lot of the dealers and collectors both groan when a collection goes to an institution and they don't have a chance to buy it and hoard it and so forth. But I feel like that's the right thing eventually. This collection will go somewhere.
Do you have any idea
Well,
when or
So
what?
the whole world can enjoy it.
If they will digitize it and post it up on
That's true.
a page, but if they just keep it and three
Right.
people every decade show up and look at it.
Right. So it's a difficult thing. Clarissa has been working with people on what's the best thing for us to do with these collections, and it's a tricky question.
Where did you go to college?
I went to UT in Austin.
So maybe talk to them about this collection because it's awfully fun.
Yeah, well, it's possible. I did publish a book a few years ago, and it was University of North Texas published it, and I did talk to the University Press in Austin, and they said, no more postcard books for us.
Ken, may I thank you. That's a very astute comment. Thank you very much. There are several institutions where you would think these collections would be of great benefit, especially to Texans. UT's Dolph Briscoe Center, but they do not have a good emphasis on postcards. It's kind of a mishmash. The what is it, Texana Division at San Antonio Public Library, the same thing. One of the best institutions in Texas for postcards is the De Gallier Library at SMU.
Yes.
Yeah, as well as
Or
photographs.
George
As, you know.
things.
That's right, George
Yeah.
Cook's collection.
Yeah,
That's
that would
correct.
be definitely a consideration. And I would say about UT and a book is like, well, Lyle Henry had just done this book, and I think it's very well done, lots of illustrations. And I think a lot of publishers go, well, that's been done, and I'm not sure the world needs another book about trekkers. But if you like it, I advise you go to Amazon. Lyle
Henry.
is a professor emeritus from one of the universities in Iowa, and apparently this has been a love of his world for a while. These Walker cards, and he did a good job of writing it up.
Okay, anybody else with their hand up? I don't see any, but I don't see everybody here. If not, over to you, Hal.
Okay, thank you. We really appreciate everyone coming today, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Hal.
Thanks, Ken. That
Thank
was
you, Ken.
fabulous.
Bye.